Welcome to Licking Non-Vanilla, a sex-positive hour of talk about kink, sexual mores, and writing dirty words. So grab a cup of cocoa, your favorite easy chair, and the lube as we go sailing into the dark, sweet waters of all things naughty on Licking Non-Vanilla with your hosts Ralph Greco Jr. and M. Christian.
So here we are at another edition of Licking. What is it? Oh, Licking Non-Vanilla. I had a complete brain fart there for a second. Welcome to Licking Non-Vanilla with me. Your co-host Ralph Greco Jr. And on the other end of the aisle is
Chris, otherwise known as M. Christian.
And we're giving another attempt at trying to educate you all on the ways of the naughty world around us, from our muted and jaded perspective, and we'll do our best, I guess, as we always do. Chris and I have I would say a veritable cornucopia of subjects that we like to hit in this show. You know, Chris, I was thinking, have you ever heard of a regular cornucopia? It's always a veritable cornucopia, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? It's like it's always a variable. It's always plugged in there somewhere.
Right, a veritable plethora, right? Yeah.
I just got told by an editor actually to stop using plethora, so it's now on my banned word list. You know, that and especially and albeit. So those
right.
words now, I have a moratorium on using those words for at least like a year.
I think that's what happens with, and I guess this is as good as any to tell you that today we're going to be talking about being a sex writer. But you know, as far as writers go, we have bad habits like anybody else, you know. And
exactly.
I'm notorious for run-on sentences. I like them a lot. So I tend to, like, when I go back and revise things, I have to cut sentences and shore them up a little bit, you know.
Oh, I know that one all too well.
Yeah, and every place you write for has their own, like Chris just says, an editor told him certain words he didn't like, but they all have their own little picadillos and the things they like and don't like, and you kind of go along with trying to maintain your own style and at the same time work for people, you know. Because as we have always said, first and foremost, we're hacks. Absolutely.
Exactly. Absolute noble hacks. That's us.
Right. Noble hacks. Right. Chris, why don't you give me a little background, because I know a little bit of this, but how you got into sex writing?
Sure. I mean, it's like, it's funny. It's like, I never really set out to be a sex writer. I've always wanted to be a writer. At least in high school, I started to decide I wanted to be. So I gave it my noble effort. And like a lot of writers, it took me, never. Actually never published anything for about 10 years. And out of the absolute blue, I was married at the time, and my wife signed me up for a class on sex writing, taught by Lisa Palick. And she at the time was running a magazine called Future Sex, which is kind of ironic because I write for a place right now called Future of Sex. But anyway,
now was that a magazine, like a paper magazine? Okay,
exactly. It's a magazine. And what was interesting about it was I had been, giving it a casual shot at writing erotica. And I gave her a story out of the blue because I was taking the class, and she bought it for the magazine, and I sort of started from there. But it's like I've never really wanted to be a sex writer. It wasn't those things I really sought out to do. But when you're a writer, like you just said wonderfully about being a hack, it's like you take the opportunities when they're presented. So suddenly I was like, I was writing sex stories, and for me it was like, oh cool, someone wants to buy what I'm writing. I mean, I don't really care what it was about. I mean, I always take pride in whatever I do, like you do, but it's one of those things. It's like, cool, I mean, I'm a writer, that's fantastic. And the fact that I'm writing about sex, it's like, well, that's kind of an extra bonus.
And at the time, where were you living? Were you living in San Francisco?
Yep, I was living in San Francisco.
So the scene at the time was, and when I say the word scene, people need to know what we mean. We're talking about the alternative sex scene, the kink scene, and that kind of thing where people congregated, either met and played, or they talked about it, or you had social gatherings, because social media didn't exist then. So did you find being in San Francisco fueled a certain kind of way of looking at the sex writing?
It did to a certain extent. I think it was like one of those times. I mean, I was pretty lucky that I started to write when the whole the whole erotica thing was starting to really kick up steam. I
Okay.
mean, you had a whole bunch of zines, but then you had like Richard Casack at Masquerade Books, and
Oh yeah, I remember.
erotica before then was just really not really all that popular. It was still pretty sleazy, but it started to actually hit with the mainstream. I mean, that's when Susie Bright started to do the Best American Erotica series and such. So it was really a great case, like in many things, like that happens to people. It was just the right place at the right time,
exactly,
so to speak.
Exactly.
And how did you start? I mean, I know you started earlier on.
Well, I don't. It's funny. Well, like you, always been a writer. And trying to get things sold, and failing miserably. And then I had a friend of mine who, the way I started with erotica was I had this friend of mine who called me, and she was going with her girlfriend. They had answered an ad. Now, this is back before computers were just becoming a little bit into vogue. And they hooked up with some guy who was looking for voice actresses for an 800 number, 900 number, both of those call-in lines, which were they were fed by a computer and facilitated by a computer, but it wasn't it was an actual phone line, back in the day, pre-recorded phone lines. And he needed sexy voiced girls for his stuff. So these two girls, the one was my friend. She called me. She said, look, this guy's kind of in your area, because the girl was a little out of the area. And she said, and I don't know this guy. So would you go with me to make sure he's on the up and up? So we went, and I mean, I think his apartment building was 10, 20 minutes from where I live. And it was like a Saturday night. The three of us went, and it ended up being he had a wife, and they were down to earth, really cool people. And he had this thing where he needed these girls to voice some stuff, some pre-recorded, just to talk scripts, basically. And then he said to me, he said, do you want to voice a script? I have a couple things from males. And I said, yeah. So I did that. And then when I was reading I said to him at the end of the night, and he gave us all money, paid us all. I said, do you ever have a need for somebody to write this stuff? I don't, like you, I don't even know why I asked that question, where it came from. And he said, yeah, I definitely do. He goes, I run out of ideas, and the 800 numbers the 900 numbers can be more explicit. The 800 numbers, not so much. So it was a real good lesson in having some rules set up, to writing. And that's where it started for me. So I started pretty much professionally out of the gate because he was paying me.
Cool.
And from there, I think I sold a piece, and like you, I sold a piece here and there. There was a lot of smaller press around and some other things, and I was doing some stuff for a magazine. And yeah, I think it just all kind of grew from there.
It's funny how these things start. It's like sometimes it's all it takes is a conversation with one person, or just an absolute kind of like, I'm just going to throw my hat in the ring and see what happens.
Right.
I mean, 90% of the time, we've talked about this before, 90% of the time, nothing happens. It's just kind of like, it fizzles out. Other times it's like, exactly. It's like, hold on, nothing. It's like, oh, geez. It's like, other times it's like, it's like become suddenly this one weird little odd connection balloons into like all kinds of different things.
Yeah, and we're actually, it's funny because Chris and I, right as as we talk about this subject, and this show goes up, we're involved writing for somebody who we got the connection together. I mean, I got the connection first, of course, but not of course. I just happened to get it, and I handed it off to Chris, and he's been writing a couple for hot movies as much as I have, and that's a perfect example of what we talked about in the first installment, which is, you're gonna find, like Chris just said, you'd never know where these things are gonna come from. Luckily, he and I go back and forth all the time. Hey, did you hear about this? Did you hear about this? And I almost had the beginning of the week we spoke. The beginning of the week, and I almost had another gig for us, but I ended up doing it, Chris, and it really would not have worked out for either of us. I decided not to.
No worries.
it was real. It was there was no money in it, and it was a just time consuming situation. So as much as I love to hook us up with things, this just would not have worked. I think I did it for like 10 minutes. I was like, I can't even get my mind around this. So
yeah, we both have shared those kind of experiences, because again, it's like sometimes we're lucky, and it's like you get a gig that's fantastic and you end up doing a ton of stuff for them and it lasts for a long time. Other times it's like, oh God, what did I get myself into? Oh my God, make this stop.
Yeah. It's just one of those things where you can't, you just don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of times, like Chris will say to you, you have to start the job to find out if it's going to work or not. And that's unfortunate, but
yep.
But
I mean, so far we've both been pretty lucky that we haven't gotten burned too often with projects that are like, do this much work for us and then they don't get paid. I mean, that's usually not a problem. It's usually like finding the gig and finding a gig that's stable. Because it's like, bills to pay and such, but it's like trying to find a gig that is going to, be a certain number a month, for instance, which is fantastic. I mean, I love writing, one shots. That's no problem whatsoever, but it's still kind of like you write the article or you write the story and they say, hey, you're great. This is fantastic, or whatever they say. And then it's like, oh, we'll get back to you in a couple of months about a new piece. It's like, I got bills to pay.
right. Yeah, I just don't either. It's just a hit or miss. Everybody's different. We've gotten lucky with some editors, and we've gotten burned, and not burned on money as much as like you're saying is like, is there? You said there was going to be some work down a pike and never came up, all that kind of stuff, But we also, when we spoke about this in another show, we also write other stuff, and. Do you find, because I don't find this too much anymore, but do you find, or earlier did you find a prejudice or stigmatizing because you wrote, erotica, and although you write other stuff, did you ever come up against people saying, well, you know what, you kind of write smut, I can't have you write this stuff, whatever happened to be, did you ever come up across that?
Surprisingly, not very often. It's really odd. I mean, I think the whole thing about erotica has changed so much, and it changed just about the time we were starting to get into it.
Right.
Because beforehand, it's like it was one of those things that no one really. I mean, a lot of writers, and we talked about this before too. It's like a lot of writers, like science fiction, mystery, and horror writers, would also write smut because it's a great way to earn a buck, and it's and it's, you can just do it that way, and so they kind of kept it on the QT. But nowadays the line is so blurry that very few times I've actually come across someone saying, oh my God, you wrote that, or, kind of repercussions. I mean, every blue moon, is something that'll happen. Like, if, just like a community or something will not be responsive, or kind of like, be kind of like, they hold their finger to their nose and, but by and large, it's usually they're pretty good about this. I remember I had an editor one time, and I had, was wanted to do something, and I suggested changing my pseudonym, and their response was, "Why? I mean, you've already got an audience." I thought, that's kind of cool. Right. It's like, of course, one, it's like I have an audience. Like, well, my mother never said that.
Right. I got you. Yeah, I think that most people are aware of the fact that adults do a whole bunch of different stuff. We said this the last time with another time, but I guess there is. I mean, there's that thing too, because we've gone to and taught at kink conventions, and that sometimes gets an odd look from people when you try to, like, when people say, and I know I've done this myself, because people say, "Oh, you're going out to Vegas to be Chris. What are you guys doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, we're going to be teaching some writing courses." That's kind of what I always say, to people that are uninitiated. And then there's other people. Like, I had a long discussion one night with my cousin's wife, who was just on the edge of her seat, fascinated by what I was telling her about the kink convention, stuff that you and I, I don't know if we find them commonplace, but certainly we've seen it enough, but most people that I talk to, that you kind of get like a little, they'll allow little tendrils of it in there, the conversation. Adults, of course. Most people are interested. They find it interesting. And almost every person I've ever talked to, even if it's something they're not into, I'm talking about the kink conventions we've done, and it's something they're not into, I've heard usually, oh, that's cool. Hey, whatever you're into, And I think most adult people have that kind of an attitude, like, oh, look, it's not my thing, but hey, that's cool, whatever you're into, And I think that's the difference,
I totally agree.
think.
It's like, I mean, I do exactly what you do. It's like I have this little dance I do. If someone says, "What do you do?" and I say, "I'm a writer,"
Right.
and then they say, "What do you write?" and I usually say like all kinds of things, because it's true. It's like we both write all kinds of different
We
things.
do. That's not a lie.
And then as things get more and more comfortable, I sort of like I try and read them.
Yeah.
But like you just said, it's like most of the time when you bring up the fact that I write a lot of things, including a lot about sex.
Right.
Right. The number of times that people have been uncomfortable has been very rare.
Yeah, because I think most people. I mean, look, most adult people have some sort of interest in sex. So, and I think to hear, I know at least I'm interested in other people's experiences, and I guess because we're writers, we like to soak that stuff up. But other people's motivations and experiences and all that kind of stuff. It's not as much. It's not as much a titillating thrill as much as I'm just interested. I think that, and I think writers in general are those kind of people. We kind of, I don't think we're any more special than anybody else, but I think we have a talent to listen and and soak it in, and then later on to regurgitate, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just an interesting thing that, like, I like you. I haven't really found a prejudice to it. I just luckily I'm very happy that we don't get that now.
I mean, it probably used to be pretty bad, but not anymore. I think the only thing that I get sort of like a weird thing sometimes from people is just that they assume that I'm into more things than I really am.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking the same thing. Absolutely.
And it's like, when you write horror, no one thinks you chop up people, But you write an article about like, truck stop liaisons with little people, or something that some publisher wanted somewhere for some market, and they suddenly people start giving you the look of, oh, you're into that. It's like, no, I'm not really. It's just it's like I'm flattered you think I am, because it means the story worked well, but at the same time it's like, not really. It's kind of, I hate to say this, for the paycheck.
Well, I guess because if you're, I think fiction too, especially because if you're writing a song, if you're writing a story about some sort of colony on Mars, that can only be from your imagination and or your wishing or whatever. You've never done it. You've never, that's just not possible. But if you write a story that has an element of kink or sex to it that you could possibly have fantasized about or done, that's when people go, okay. He obviously is not chopping up bodies in his basement, but he could be, spanking Japanese boys, 25-year-old Japanese boys. Like it's anything's possible in that way. So that's when people give you that, like, they look at you askance and go, well, let me think about this a second. Is that the thing that's on his mind or he's doing? And I think, and of course, because we both write a lot in what's considered niche material, which is or you could call it kink, whatever you want to call it, but then people look at you and I and go, wow, you guys must do all this stuff or have or want to do, and it's not always the case. I mean,
absolutely.
If my past sex life was as rich and varied as what I write about, boy, man, I'd be long dead or have some sort of disease. I mean, that's just not how we roll. We're just not that kind of guys,
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, I think both of us, we've written all kinds of things outside of our normal, sexual response and our orientation. It's like, that's why I'm always very clear that what I write is fiction. And I'm always very clear too about being straight about, being straight.
Right.
Exactly. And it still kind of like surprises me sometimes when people make the assumption. It's like, well, I consider it kind of a compliment. I mean, I think it's wrong for a writer to pretend to be something they're not just just to sell a story.
Mhm.
So I'm always, I know we both do this. We're very clear about who we are as people.
Mhm.
But still,
Yeah,
it's kind of
yeah.
a compliment when someone assumes that you're into something because it means the story worked really well. So it's like, oh, they must be into it because the story's so hot. It's like, well, thank you.
Oh yeah, or you hear something like like you write a story from a woman's point of view, and it's a gay story, so it's a lesbian story, and
Hmm.
and people like it. You're like, wow, that's great. That's a good compliment because I don't particularly know that world, but
Hmm.
I do know about
Hmm.
desire, and I do know about all the things that anybody would have, and
Hmm.
that's what we always say about the sexual world and the kink world. Although you don't necessarily have to have done those things to read about them or write
Hmm.
about them. Um, we the people's sexual responses, while varied, they you know they're all we're all human beings, so we all have our things. We have the
Hmm.
same. There's a sameness, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, to our sexual responses, even though we could be doing a lot of different things to get there.
Hmm. Exactly. And you just stole my thunder because that's exactly what I like to tell people. It's like if you focus on the differences, the story kind of tends to be it doesn't work. But if you
Hmm.
focus on what we all have in common, then yeah, it's actually, I find it's much more effective.
Hmm.
And that's something that I think we both take kind of a pride in is that, we look for the commonalities. The only time it's tricky is when it's something that's kind of outside your normal experience range, like certain fetishes and such.
Right, right.
But even then, it's like, a little research goes a long
That's
way.
true. That's true. Yeah, or just talking to people like at a convention and the things we've learned, from other people.
Hmm.
And I'm not even talking in one of the classes. I'm just talking to somebody.
Hmm.
They come
Hmm.
across with something. Yeah,
And sometimes it's
yeah,
also because of certain project or editor, they require something too. So,
yeah, and so that often heard refrain of write what you know.
hmm.
It's not specific. I never took that specifically because I remember reading Bradbury, and Bradbury said, I've never been to Mars, but he wrote the
Hmm.
Martian Chronicles, which
Hmm.
are considered by many to be classic.
Hmm.
So how do you get away with writing about that if you've never been to the planet? Well, those stories are about the human condition.
Hmm.
Needs, desires, emotions, all the things that we have if you live in Turkey or Timbuktu. It doesn't matter. And I
Hmm.
think the same can be said for sexual stories or erotica. That in those
Hmm.
stories are the meat and taters of who we are, how we feel about things, no matter what it is we're doing.
Hmm. Exactly, exactly. It's like again focusing on the commonalities and not the differences.
Yeah.
And I think that you're completely correct. I mean, that's what I think what will sell a good story or what makes a story good memorable. It also means that it's like, if you focus too much on like, what is different or what not to sound judgmental, strange about something,
Hmm.
the people who are into that and are going to detect it. They're going to feel that kind of sense of otherness, and the
Hmm.
story won't work. So it's like once again, it's like I consider it a huge compliment when people think that we're into these things. It's like, oh, that's cool. It means I did my job well.
Yeah, because there are times when we have both had to take a step back and do research.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
by a lot of times the research is me asking you a question, because you are the wise old sage. But many times I have had to like look up how a corset fit,
Mm-hmm.
or the specific tethers of a certain crop. It's just
Mm-hmm.
because we don't exactly know, and getting into the characters' heads. Sometimes the specificity is important. Sometimes it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it clunks up the story, but some other times
Mm-hmm.
it is important.
Exactly, exactly. And it's like, and that's the thing. It's like, I mean, we're not perfect. Sometimes we do better jobs than others. And it's like,
True. True.
sometimes I finish a story and it's like, didn't really go that way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because you start out,
but
you're like, this is going to be fantastic, and I get there, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know where this. I don't know what I did right or wrong here, but this didn't work the way I thought it
hmm.
was gonna. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Yep.
But I mean, it's funny. It's like it's one of the things. Yeah, it's like getting into this industry is so. It's funny. It's like we've talked about this before. It's like, sometimes people like want to be an erotica writer, which I think is a noble thing. So we kind of came in kind of the sideways because we were basically writers looking for a place to sell our work. But
Right.
getting into this is actually, I mean, it's changed so much since our early days of when dinosaurs ruled the earth, and
Right.
it's like back when like the Roman legions were still a problem. I mean, it's just like, these days it's like, because of all social media and such. But I think the mechanisms are still the same. It's just basically just getting your work out there, and sometimes, frankly, giving it away for free is a good idea, at least when you're first starting out.
I know. I think that's an important point that people realize. There's literal depositories of erotica online that you could just throw a story up on, and there are plenty of places online, or even like small zines. People are still making this that'll take your stories for free. They won't pay you, and sometimes you have to still go through the vetting and submission process there. They might not take your stuff, but if you get a story seen in a site that's seen by a bunch of people, it's better than where it's just laying there in your closet. So.
And then the whole thing is building up your resume too. It's
right.
When you first start out, you're no one knows who you are, and in your very first story. So it's like, after a point, suddenly you can sort of attach to your cover letter. It's like, oh yes, I was on this place, and then this place, and then this place, and then suddenly eyebrows start to raise, and your work starts to get more visible, and your name starts to get a little bit of recognition, which can help a lot. But yeah, when you're first starting out, it's like, even unless you're writing the Great American Novel, it's like giving your work away for free is not a bad idea. It's like, get that recognition out there.
I mean, it's wonderful to be paid, but that didn't come down the pipe. I mean, I got lucky because the first time I did it was those scripts, but it's not something that happens all that often in the beginning. And Chris and I have had these situations that have been unbelievably lucrative, and we were pretty much surprised. And the other situations where you're kind of like scrapping and shucking and jiving to get where you need to get.
Exactly.
So what do you think overall? Because I get this question all the time. We both get this question. Where the ideas come from?
It's funny. It's like, I know in my case, it's like, it's a majority of them actually are because of whatever someone wants. I sometimes find it hard when someone says, "Oh, just write me a story." It's like, I don't know what to do. I'm kind of like deer in the headlights.
Right.
So I like, getting sort of a guideline where it's, cowboys or vampires or, kink or something like that. It allows me to focus a bit better, and then I just sort of go from there. But if I just have to sit down and write a story, it's kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
Then that's just me. I mean, some people, find like having some kind of restriction or, some kind of like requirement for whatever the book or magazine or website is. And I'm just weird in that way. But sometimes it's like, I get inspired from other places. I mean, I like to say that sometimes when I'm writing erotica, it's not so much I'm writing erotica. It gives me a chance to write the genres I'm actually really interested in. So when someone says, I want to do a cowboy, erotica, my first reaction is usually, I get to write a cowboy story.
Right. Yeah. First and foremost.
That has that sex in it.
Yeah. I think that we've said this too. Like, you just kind of, you're out there keeping your eyes and ears open, and things come in, and you don't even realize they came into your subconscious, and later on you puke it out and go, well, that's a title, or that's a character, or I heard a snippet of a conversation, or or I read somebody. I mean, the more reading you do, the better it is anyway. So,
oh, absolutely.
But as far as I don't know. I don't know where the ideas come from, and sometimes they are fantasy. Sometimes there are an amalgamation of what we maybe done in our lives a little bit, and we want it to be more the other way, or more a lot of it that other way. It's a bit, but and then like Chris said, sometimes we get an assignment, whether for fiction or nonfiction, or we're trying to put together, like, say, a collection of short stories, and to find like a common theme to get them all together. Sometimes that'll help you out too, But yeah, I mean, I
I think anthologies are still around. They're not as prevalent as they used to be. Because for a while before the internet, the only place to get fiction was either magazines or in books, which
Right.
you get anthologies, which is usually a book of stories written by more than one person, usually to a theme.
Right.
And so you'd get these calls for submissions placed on like certain magazines or such, or even just kind of spread around like, kind of like under the table between writers. And it would say things like, okay, here's a number of words, here's the theme, all this kind of stuff. And I think there's those still exist, but it'll be kind of replaced now mostly with a lot of web stuff. But yeah, they can give you a really good guidance about where to go, and you can sort of like decide, it's like what kind of story it's going to be, and the number of words and that kind of stuff. And certain websites have the same thing these days. It's like, here's a website that does like science fiction erotica, or here's one that does horror, or here's one that does gay or lesbian fiction, or GLBT fiction, or something similar. So it's like once you have that, it sort of becomes like a little bit of a good like way of focusing you, so you know exactly what you have to do and so forth. And of course, reading what's on the what they've already published helps a lot too.
Yeah, well, that's a big one. If you go to sites or magazines, always say, see what we published before. Gives you an idea. Yeah, I think that generally all this stuff, I mean, because I was thinking about this too, about this show, and this, by the way, the name of the show is Licking Non-Vanilla, so I said it right that time. The thing about this work and this job that we do, in a way, when Chris and I talk about it, when we teach the writing classes specifically, or we talk about it this way or in conversation, we pretty much demystify it. Because to us it's work, and anybody else, whatever else you're doing that you want to get better at, and or you make money at, or you're trying to make more money at, or your name at, or reputation, whatever that is, it's this. There's no difference in the way. There's no difference in the approach, really. The tools may be different, the result may be different, the actual work itself may be different. But the effort, because people say all the time, well, how do you become a writer? And all I say, from the get-go, we've said this 1,000,000 times, you got to just start writing. I don't know what else to tell you. and then you got to work at it. And so how do you become a real good pizza maker? You start making pizzas and you fail and you get better at it, right? It's the same thing. There's no difference.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's like I mean, I often will get a little down when I think about all the years I spent trying to sell stories, but I also realize that's also a lot of time where I was like, perfecting, I wouldn't say perfecting my skills, because I'm a firm believer that it's like we're still always kind of working on that.
Absolutely.
But it's like just practice. I mean, that's the big thing. Like you just said, it's practice. I mean, the more you do, I mean, basically the first story you ever write is going to suck. I mean, universally that's true. Yeah, there's a few exceptions, but they're very, very rare. This story is going to suck. That's that simple. The next story is going to suck. The next story after that's going to suck. The next story after that's going to suck. And then guess what? The next one doesn't quite suck as bad.
Right. Its suckage level is a little less. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so it's like you do that enough times, and eventually you learn what makes a sucky story and what isn't, and you start to learn how to feel the story, so you know when it's working well or not, and how to fix it if it's not, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just pure experience, and that's why it's like, it's funny. It's like when we do our class, you'll have, sometimes, and I'm not trying to make fun of people, because everyone has a different process, and everybody has a different path and so forth. But every blue moon will come across somebody who's been working on like the same story for like 16 years. It's like, just like, go on, move along, put that one in a drawer or throw it away, get the next one going, because the more you do, the more likelihood you're going to get better and better and learn from your mistakes, and, learn tricks. And like you just said, also read a lot. I mean, just like read everything. I mean, it's like find out what people are doing, and, and it's going to sound weird, but, steal. And I'm not saying plagiarize, but learn how they do things. Like, see how this person does dialogue, or this person does descriptions, or that person has really good sex, descriptions. And, it's like, you don't use the words exactly, but you learn how they did it and try and, do the same kind of thing.
And what you just said is really important too, because I remember I could even see this lady's face at one of the conventions, who had been working on something for a very long time. and you could see she was stuck. She just couldn't get out of her own way, you know. And we were gently trying to nudge her in the hey, why don't you put that aside and get to something else direction, you know? Because like you said, everybody's process is different. But there comes a time when, and this is true, I think, across the board of everything, and I'm as guilty as this as anybody. But there comes a time when the thing is done, or should at least be put to the side, and maybe you can work on something else and come back to it. But you know as well as I do, I think Hemingway said, what did Hemingway say about writing? Writing was rewriting, and that's true. But there gets to a point where you just gotta push away from the table, you know, and that is true of every pursuit, because we are not perfect beings, and the thing we make or the thing we work on is never going to be perfect, ever. The pizza is going to be great, but it's not going to be perfect. And the story is going to be great, but it's never going to be perfect.
Exactly. And that's the thing. That's exactly it. It's like, and also it's like learning to let go of control. I mean, because sometimes it's like, you know, like I'll sell an article or a story or something similar, and then when it comes out, it's like, now it's rare for stories, but mostly it's for articles where the editor will do rewrites or tweak or something similar, and it's like, you know, you gotta let that go. I mean, it's difficult, especially when something you spend a lot of time on. But when, you know, you send an article and it gets tweaked or something similar, or when you sell a story and the editor says, you know, oh, I need you to change blank, blank, blank. You know, it's like there's this whole big thing about like being a writer where you're supposed to stand up for yourself, and you know, and you know, but it's like at the same time, it's like there's a difference between standing up for yourself and being a pain to work with.
Oh yeah, well, and Chris, that's true of every. Oh my God, Chris, we could take that to every level of every endeavor. You know, like you happen to do this or this, but unless you're working on my brain, there's gonna be a time where you got to step back. But if you think my brain needs a little bit more tweaking and during the surgery, take as much time as you want. But you know, but generally in life, there's got to come a point where you just kind of, you got to shut up. And you know, I see that. I don't know if we talked about this. I'm trying to remember if we did, but I see that in playwriting all the time. The playwright, because in playwriting you write the thing and then somebody's speaking your words, which can be very startling the first time you've heard it. It could be wonderful, or it could be startling, or both. You know, because you're these characters saying out loud what you wrote, as opposed to in a story. And a lot of times I've watched playwrights suffered the damned, you know, because they want to go back and tweak now, you know, or like, or what happens is the actor or the director want to change something a little bit, make it a little easier, or say, you know, you've said this thing now 3 times in this actor's voice, you know, whatever. And I've seen plenty of playwrights that they can't stop revising. They just can't get out of their own way, and inevitably they're not invited. I've only been invited once to a rehearsal, because the rule is you don't let the writer in the door, because he's gonna you know, he's gonna be the biggest prima donna on the planet. You know, oh, you cannot change that that word is and if you change it to a, we're gonna have a biggest problem, you know. And playwrights, and I think it's because you're hearing your words said out loud. And I think that makes it even more resonant. You're like, oh my God, you know, you cannot touch that. You know, you put your head back and your scarf around your neck, and I can't work with these people. You know, but you know, you have to know when to well, what did Kenny Rogers just died recently, right? Well, he knew. He said, know when to hold them, know when to fold them. You know.
Yep.
Exactly.
I tell you, it's like I admire you for a lot of reasons, and one of the big ones is the fact that you have such a talent for writing for scripts, and especially for plays. And it's like, you know, I have to say that, you know, it's like I this kind of touches on what we were talking before. It's like we all have different strengths and weaknesses, and
absolutely,
that's one thing. It's like when I hear you doing that, when I read your work, it's like, oh my God, it's like, you know, it's like I just came in. I mean, I've tried a couple of times, and it's just not in my wheelhouse.
Right.
It's just like. It's one of those things. That's another thing too. It's like recognizing what your strengths and weaknesses are, because sometimes it's like, we can just beat ourselves up because we don't do something well. I mean, maybe it's fiction or poetry or
Mm-hmm.
screenplays or something like that. It's like, not every creative person can do every creative thing. It's like
No, it's
there's
plenty of
many things.
limitations we both have.
Yeah.
For sure, for sure.
It's like I was talking to a friend of mine the other night, and it's like, and you're very much like this yourself, because like you write very character driven, and
Mm-hmm.
while I like writing characters, I'm more story driven, and I have a
Mm-hmm.
hard time, doing character driven things. It's something I'm trying to work on, because I think
Yeah.
it's important to like take what you're not good at and try your best to try and get better at it. But also, it's like sometimes you just have to admit, it's like, I just suck at this.
Yeah,
I just can't do this.
and that's
It's like...
fine. And that's fine. Like, to acquiesce to your
Mhm.
weaknesses will
Mhm.
you find your strengths, and that's true again, in every business, that's true. I
Mhm.
don't care what it is. There's certain things that everybody has innate talents,
Mhm.
and I think that's true. Everybody does.
Mhm.
And just because the thing you do maybe doesn't bring you fortune and fame or it's creative doesn't mean it's not artful. If it's a thing you do well, it's a thing you do well. But
Mhm.
there are times when you cultivate and work at something and you get better at it. And there's
Mhm.
other times you could do that with things and it will never work.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know about you, Chris, because I mean, most guys that I know are good with words are not good with math. I don't know about you, but
Mhm.
I
Oh, me
haven't.
too. I'm horrible with math. I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
I forget it. I mean, it's like, it's like I just, when I try and do my bank balance, it's just like I just like roll the bones and hope things work out. I mean, it's just like
Right.
I'm really not very good at it.
No, I
But
just
you're right. It's like,
that
and
don't
I
work.
think it's also important to, I'm also think it's important to try too, because it's like, I mean, both of us never thought we'd be erotica writers until we give it a shot, and guess what? We enjoyed it, and oh my
Yeah.
God, people bought the work. And the same way, it's like, I like to tell people, it's like, you don't know if you don't know if you're the best, science fiction, romance, mystery, horror writer out there until you give it a shot. And if you're not, big whoop. I mean, history's rife with, writers who went through periods where they're trying out to see what they're good at. It's like
Hmm.
you look at their careers, and there's like, and this is true about musicians and painters as well. It's like this is their, unsuccessful, crying clown
Yeah,
phase,
right.
and
Yeah, yeah.
this is the
Dogs playing cards on velvet or whatever it happens to be. Yeah,
exactly, and this is
yeah,
this is the '80s when everybody was writing horror novels, and oh my God, that person never should have written a horror novel,
yeah, yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and that really is true. You got to just, and it's always good to try. I mean, and to try things, jobs that maybe you've never done, but you always had
Mm-hmm.
an inkling
Mm-hmm.
for. Like, I always thought about welding. Well, give it a shot. Somehow
Exactly. What's the
find
worst that
somebody
can
you know
happen?
to, yeah, well, you could weld your fingers together, but be safe. But find somebody, and it's just, the same was true with when it comes to sexual pursuits.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
give it a shot. If you're
Mm-hmm.
interested and have a fantasy and you have a like-minded partner, or can find some friends, and you
Mm-hmm.
can certainly find communities nowadays online. If you have a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of an idea of doing something you've never done sexually, go ahead. Just be safe and
Mm-hmm.
consensual. Give it a shot.
Yep.
I don't know what's going to happen.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I've tried a bunch of things. I know you have too. It's just like, oh, that was cool. That's something I can add to my play bag. Other times it's like, okay, that stays in the fantasy realm,
Right,
or it's something
right.
that really didn't work, or it works a lot better as a fantasy than it does in reality, or all kinds of different things. And that's the thing. It's like it's fun to experiment. And it's like unfortunately, it's like in many people in this world, look on like making mistakes or failure as a bad thing. It's like, yeah, it can be. It can be very upsetting, but at the same time, that's how you learn. I mean, that's
Right.
how, you figure out what's good and what works and what doesn't. I mean, it's like, there's nothing wrong with trying something that didn't work the first time.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with trying it, like you were saying about this, certain pursuits, and it doesn't work for you. And
Mm-hmm.
you could just say, well, that didn't work for me. So
Mm-hmm.
there's many instances of just because you can doesn't mean you should. And
Mm-hmm.
you get
Mm-hmm.
there, especially with something in your head that you've maybe had as a fantasy for a long time, and then you
Mm-hmm.
try to make it
Mm-hmm.
to reality, and you're like, oh, this, I think we talked about this in the first show. It just comes up short, or it just comes up woefully different than you thought it was going to be, and not in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
because we all know reality and fantasy are two different things. That's why they have. That's why they're two different words, and it happens all the time. It happens all the time, you know, and because we've seen it as much in our own lives as with people that we've come in contact with, you know, like, that's not really what I thought it was going to be, you know, the minute it becomes real, you know.
And that's the thing about writing too. It's like, I really think we should have better depictions of what it's like to be a writer. Because it's like you look at the media and it's so funny because all this stuff is written by writers, but writers don't like to really say what it's about, so you end up with this kind of like fantasy version of what it's like being a writer. So there's always the montage of them getting better, and suddenly the New York agent calls them up, and then they're on Oprah, or something like this. It's like, it's like I want to show the not wanting to really write, but you got to because you got to pay the phone bill, or or the rejection letters, or the writer you really hate who's really an arrogant twit suddenly gets the book deal you wanted, and it's just like, or heaven forbid the awards ceremony. It's like I think there's a film called Swimming Pool, and it has my favorite quote about writers awards. It's like let's see it's like the quote is like, writing awards are like hemorrhoids. It's guaranteed an asshole will eventually get one.
Well, yeah. Was that this? That's the I told him I'm thinking of The Swimmer. Remember The Swimmer?
Oh, The Swimmer. Oh, that's a classic film. That's with Burt Lancaster.
That's a crazy movie, though. Don't you think that's a
wonderful? Oh, I love that. It's a crazy movie. Oh, absolutely.
I don't know if you've ever seen that movie because you just saw the swimming pool, but I was thinking of what's crazy about that movie is he literally just goes from swimming pool to swimming pool, right? In upper in like L.A., right? Is that where it takes place?
Yeah, I think it's L.A. Yeah.
Weird movie, and it's real existential, right? There's times when like he'll come into I think it's early 60s, right? 61 maybe.
I think so.
So
I can look it up, but I'm just too lazy right now. My computer's right here.
So it's Lancaster, right? So he's in swimming trunks the whole movie. He's in really great shape. It's when he was in really good shape, and he just goes from swimming pool. It starts out something with his kids, I think. And then,
I know the story, but I don't want to surprise you if someone hasn't seen it. But yeah, it's like he's in swimming trunks. He's basically swimming his way home, going from one pool to another.
It is a wacky movie, but it's cool though. It's really cool because every time he comes upon a new pool and he sees the people who live in those houses, and they're pretty well-to-do. They all have a different kind of take on life, and they all talk about certain aspects of life, and it's if you ever get a chance to see that movie, that's because the minute you said the swimming pool thing, I was thinking of it. That's a weird movie. Weird.
And that's another thing. It's like you just had. I think you touched on something else right before about experiences. It's like you talk about like inspirations. It's like I get my inspirations from movies all the time. I mean, it's one of my favorite things. I mean, sometimes it's like I'll see a movie and it's like, or something like The Swimmer is a good example. It's like, I've actually done some pretty open parodies of like, famous films, and like that's kind of cheating because I didn't even like disguise the inspiration. It's like, here's my take on like Sweet Smell of Success, which is another fantastic Burt Lancaster movie. It's like, but other times it's like I'll be watching because I'm like yourself, as a compulsive like reader and movie watcher and such, and I'll see a movie or something similar. It's like, it's like that didn't work, but you do that, it could be cool, and then that becomes a story or something. It's just like
absolutely.
But yeah, it's like I love I eat the stuff up.
Yeah, because if you haven't figured it out by now, Chris and I are relatively rabid junkies of certain kind of films and TV shows, and certainly a certain era of stuff. We went to a kink convention once. I think it was the second time, and one of the people there drove us around. Actually, was the car service for everybody, and we got friendly with this guy. And one night we went out late night in St. Louis to a really cool diner. Remember that diner?
Oh, that was blast. That was so much fun.
And we found out the guy we were with had worked in L.A. On all the monster kind of not the makeup. I was going to say makeup, but not makeup. Was all like the prosthetics at that time, and I don't know if they're probably like paper mache, but he worked on shows like Outer Limits, right?
Oh yes, yes.
He was telling us about all this stuff, and Chris and I were salivating. It was just so cool because he had worked on all this stuff all these shows that Chris and I grew up on, and it's just one of those super geek moments. So we have those things, and you'll hear them often on the show. We go from hot and heavy sex talk to like talking about the original Star Trek, which had Lieutenant Uhura on it anyway. So talk about she was didn't we knew somebody who knew pretty good friends when they with Roddenberry when they began Star Trek, and talked about this sexy new actor that they were trying out. I ended up being William Shatner. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Who was if you watch those shows, they're on every night here, and these are things.
I love binge watching them. Exactly.
Yeah,
it's like there's so many fun things out there. I mean, like God bless the world of tomorrow. It's like I still remember, and this is going to date us, but having to if you wanted to see something like a certain film, you had to go to either convention or some nowhere, part of the world because they happen to be playing that one particular movie. It's like now it's like, a web search and boing, there it is. There's that show I watched when I was a kid.
You damn kids don't know how good you got it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. I just,
no more midnight, matinees and, that kind of stuff. I mean, it's like, they still do it to a certain extent, but not like they used to. And it's like, we talked before, I think on one of our other shows about how things have changed, but it's like, I still think it's really cool that, I'll often find myself I don't know about you, but I'll find myself doing things like, digging up some piece of obscure movie or a television show I saw and I vaguely remembered, so I'll spend a little bit of time playing detective and trying to track it down.
Right. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, see, I mean that's what happens when you're a writer, because your imagination is fired like that, and you're always locked into the memory or the inspiration, So that's what comes of us. Now,
and that's it. It's like, I think it's like we mentioned before, it's like, I'm sorry for interrupting, but it's I do think it's like, inspiration is not just, I mean, that's the other thing. It's like, there's this kind of the myth of the muse, it's like you're laying there and you've got your jacket with the leather patches on it and you're smoking your pipe and suddenly the muse shows up and, oh my God, there's the book that makes your name and there's the movie that everyone loves.
Right.
When 90% of the time, this stuff kind of comes it's like you're taking something that you half saw, half remembered, or you're trying to do the same thing somebody else did. It's like, like if you have a favorite author, or a favorite movie maker or a favorite playwright or musician, it's like, most of the time they're inspired by somebody else and they're just trying to do the same kind of thing that their inspiration did.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And we hope we inspired you here on Licking Non-Vanilla as we're coming to the end of the show. Chris, can you believe it? We just rambling.
Oh, no, wonderful. It's always a blast.
It is. Now, very soon, and I don't know when this is going to be, but it's going to be soon enough, we're going to start we're going to start taking emails and answering those. And then we're also going to have guests on here calling in, people from various pursuits mainly in the sexual arena. And so we're going to get them on too, so we can talk to them and get their perspective. But today you had my perspective and Chris's perspective, which is really the only two you need. But thank you very much, Chris. This has been Licking Non-Vanilla with Ralph Greco Jr.
and Chris, otherwise known as M. Christian.
So you take care, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
And visit us on the web at www.lickingnonvanilla.com.